Hi, this is Anna Jacobson, Operations and Data Partner at Operator Collective, and you're listening to Experiencing Data with Brian T. O'Neill.
You're now experiencing data with Brian O'Neill. Experiencing Data explores how product managers, analytics leaders, data scientists, and executives are looking at design and user experience as a way to make their custom enterprise data products and analytics applications more useful, usable, and valuable. And now, here's your host, the founder and principal of Designing for Analytics, Brian O'Neill.
Welcome back to Experiencing Data. This is Brian T. O'Neill. Today, I'm really happy to have one of our founding members of the data product leadership community on the phone with me. I guess we're not on the phone, we're on remotely, but Anna Jacobson, how are you? What's going on?
I'm doing great, Brian. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited. So you're going to be giving hosting one of our live group discussions at the end of mid-December here, end of 2024. And I thought it'd be fun to give people kind of a sneak peek of what you're going to be talking about in that, and more on the themes, at least in this episode, kind of overarching themes and ideas about data products. The first thing I wanted to ask you, though, is like when I saw your title, I was like, oh, Operations and Data Partner. I know Operator Collective is a venture capital company, but how in the heck are you like involved with data products, and like how did you find yourself over to the DPLC? Like, what's the connection there?
Yeah, so I think compared to a lot of people in the community, my journey to data product leadership has been nonlinear, let's say that. I started out, I got my undergrad degree in structural engineering, worked briefly as a structural engineer, and then transitioned into construction management. I did that for many years, and then got really interested in data. So I went back to school. I got a master's degree in data science. And at that point, when I graduated, it was 2020. It was a few months into the pandemic. The world was sort of on fire. And I wasn't sure what I wanted to do next. And a friend who was starting a venture capital fund reached out to me and said, hey, I have a vision for how we're going to use data at my fund, which was called Operator Collective. Can you come help me out? So I started in a consulting capacity. After a few months, it became clear to us that was going to work. So I came on full time and eventually ended up taking over all of the operations functions for the fund, which in venture capital, that means fund operations, fundraising, investor relations, fund administration, all of the sort of internal ops, handling third-party vendors like legal and finance. So it's a bunch of different things. So I would say I'm sort of an accidental data product leader. It was never in my title. It was never in my job description. But both in my work in construction and my work in venture capital, I've just sort of naturally gravitated towards building and implementing data products as part of the work that I was doing on a daily basis.
Got it. So most of the solutions, these products that you're building right now, these are going to be internally facing for the investors or the people working inside Operator Collective?
Correct. 100%.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. Tell me about, I know you were doing some of this work when you were doing construction management, and I'm always kind of curious as, when you go to the next chapter, what do you take with you? What do you leave behind? Were there lessons learned? Are you kind of repeating a similar model of how you are leveraging data products to help out these organizations you're working with?
Yeah, I would say at a sort of 30,000 foot level, there's a group of reasons why a company might want to implement data products. And what I found is even with a lot of differences, not just differences in industry, but differences in team size and background of users and goals for the company. Even though those things are all different, the reasons why we use data products, again at that very high level, are quite similar. As you get closer to the ground, the differences show up a little more. Construction is it has a reputation of being sort of change averse, technically behind, those kinds of things. I think now that I'm outside of the industry, I see that was not really specific to construction management, but a lot of the behaviors are typical of any legacy industry that just didn't grow up thinking about data and using data products. In venture capital, it's a little different. We invest in tech companies, so we're very tech adjacent. And I would say, techno positive. But at the same time, the company that I work for is a startup. It wasn't even a year old when I joined. And so the challenges for me are almost the reverse, in that I'm not dealing with a bunch of entrenched behaviors and legacy systems and all of that, but I am building everything from scratch. And, not just the tool itself, the product, but also all of the processes and practices that go with it.
Got it. Are you able to talk about that at all, about what this is, or just kind of paint a visual image for people when you say this product at Operator Collective?
Sure. So at Operator Collective, our founder, Malin Yen, had a vision very early on that she wanted the way that the fund ran, the fund operations, to be very data informed, data heavy, I would say, given the size and sort of maturity level of the fund. So again, when I joined, we had just started. I was handed a bunch of spreadsheets with a bunch of data in it and told go. And so it was really energizing in some ways as a data product leader to say, this is a new company, like big picture, I know what the vision is and what the strategy is, but there are a lot of details that are still being worked out. I have this data set, or again, in this case, it was a bunch of little data sets. How can I bring that all together and create a data ecosystem that's valuable for the company? And it's pretty rare, if not singular, in venture capital. I talk to a lot of people working in other VC funds, and nobody's doing exactly the things that we're doing. But I would say that everybody recognizes there's a lot of data floating around in the industry, and there's a lot of things we can be doing with it.
Got it. Are there like a handful of specific use cases or maybe the really high value ones are the ones that are like working well for Operator Collective? Because lack of use, which we'll probably get into, low adoption is one of the hardest problems that kind of, to me, is like this cancer in the data product space is really the secret that so much of this work is not getting used a lot of the time. So I'm curious, are there specific areas that you're seeing high reliance on these data products that you're creating?
Yeah, so Operator Collective, unlike a lot of venture capital funds, Operator Collective is also a community. It's a community of operators, which we define as tech executives. And it's also a community of founders, which are the companies that we're investing in. They are building and scaling those companies. And so part of our whole reason for being is to bring those two groups together into a single community where the investors, the operators, are going to financially benefit from their investment, and the founders benefit from the expertise, the networks, the all of the knowledge that the operators have. So that's the model of Operator Collective. My sort of big goal when I came in was, how do we collect and analyze the data to prove that the model is working, and or to identify where it's not working and make changes. So again, this is not sort of the normal use case for data in venture capital, but a really exciting one to think about in terms of how does data support community building. So one of the ways that I've worked on this or thought about this problem is that we have different functional areas within the company. We have our community, which is just sort of all the people and all the organizations that exist in our ecosystem. And we have our investments, which is a very specific function. And then we have what in venture capital is called platform. It's really all of the post-investment support that an investor provides to the portfolio. And that can include, at least for us, it includes things like events, programs, direct support that we provide, but also all of those connections that we're making between the founders and our operators. So what I did was, each of those three things is a separate database that has its own functions. Each one has an interface where people on the team can interact with the data. But I also created a database where all of that data gets piped together, and that gives us a single pane view of every touch point, every activation point within our community. And so my internal team is able to view that in sort of real time, but we've also created a practice of sharing that information out within the community as well.
I see. Like one thing you talked about, like, is the model working or not? And one of the places I find that we often end up with low adoption is if we ladder that back, we haven't figured out what it means to observe it's not working. Like the words it's not working has to be an observable trait. And it suggests if the asker, the requester, is saying, I want to know if it's not working or if it is working, by definition, that must be observable or you wouldn't know that it's not working. So we have to define some parameters for what working and not working means in order to design anything that might possibly help you change something. So I'm curious if that's, and I'm only digging into, it's kind of almost arbitrary that I'm digging into this, but what are some of those indicators of it's working or not working, and how did that end up in some kind of digital form, interface, or however it's experienced? Can you unpack how you got from kind of the vague statement from leadership down to like, working means this in this context, and we can now track that and make changes?
Yeah. So, I mean, these are all great points, and I will not claim to have complete answers to any of it. It's definitely a work in
That's
progress. Okay. I mean, first of all, to your first point, yeah, I mean, proving a negative is pretty much impossible, right? Like, so to start with, proving that it's not working is difficult. And you're also in kind of a Schrodinger's cat kind of situation where, the things that happen, you can't ever know what would have happened had those things been different, right? So one of the original challenges for me was even defining what success would look like in that model. So it's very easy to say this is what the vision is, but it took a lot of digging and a lot of thinking to get that down into something that could be supported with data. And so I actually now have a framework for thinking about that I share with others who are doing this kind of work, because it's not to say that this is the way that I did it. It's the way I would do it now, knowing what I know. And that is basically to start by defining what the vision for the community is. So that includes who the community is, which isn't always clear, and what the value that they are getting out of the community is. So what are they there for? And then once you do that, I think then you can start thinking about what does success look like in that community. And there are definable metrics of success. So I do think that engagement is number one for any community. Without engagement, you really don't have anything. You can't accomplish anything else in a community. But then there are other metrics that may or may not be relevant. So, for instance, there are a lot of communities that use growth as a metric. For us, that was never the intent. So we purposely kept our numbers quite limited. We wanted it to be intimate. We wanted it to be special. So growth is an example of a success metric that we don't think about or talk about. And, understanding that really helps, because otherwise, as the data person, you may just be tasked with gathering all the data that you possibly can and not knowing what is actually going to be meaningful. So for us, connection is really the next success metric. And so making those connections between the people in our community is very, very core to what we're doing here. So that naturally then leads to, well, if that's the success metric, then what's the KPI that goes with connection? And for us, it really is about, tracking all of those introductions that we're making between people. And that can be, via email. It can also be in other ways, like where we host an event where we're connecting people. So we have a number then of KPIs that we associate with that one success metric. And then from those KPIs, you can derive what data you need to collect. So, for instance, event attendance is very important to us. And we track not only who attended an event, but also everyone who was invited. So we can start to look at attendance rates and things like that. So, that's a fairly mundane example, but that is how I think of it, is going from vision to success metric to KPI to data. And then from there, you can really start building, how do you share that information?
Got it. And are you the de facto product manager for all of this, or do you have a team? Do you have design and engineering support? Like, do you roll all this yourself? How does that work?
That's all me. We're a tiny team. We are six FTEs with some part-time support. So everything is me. I build using Airtable, which is a no-code and fairly low-tech platform, but it was selected before I started, and it turns out it's really great for what we're doing because it's very flexible. And so I've sort of become an Airtable expert and built all of our products through that.
Got it. So tell me about this. You talked about in our group discussion, which I'm looking forward to, about non-believers. The resistance of non-believers and how we design for people who are perhaps actively against as opposed to passively or disinterested. They're actually detractors. That tells me there's some story there.
Yeah.
Yes, where did you get to that?
Stories. First of all, I've spoken with dozens of people in the community now. I had the fun task of vetting lots of people who've joined the community. So I've had a number of conversations with people. And I feel in every conversation, no matter where it starts, we always end up talking about the challenges of implementation. And I feel like this is a very, very common, not just a common challenge, but something that people working with data products are always thinking about is how do you implement? And because of that, I know that this is a pervasive problem and nothing that is specific to my experience. But I will say, coming out of the field that I came from, construction management, and also because I was never in a role, and the role never existed in the company where I worked, where somebody was tasked with data products. Every data product that I worked on, which was probably 20 or so, there was a significant role for persuasion as part of getting that product off the ground. I can't think of a single one where everybody was immediately on board and it was just like, let's go do this thing. And so through that experience, even though I didn't even know data product management as a term, I didn't even know that term and never thought of what I was working on as data products, I knew that there were things that I thought would be good for us as an organization. And my job was to go out and get people to support it, to advocate for it, and then to use it. And that was always the hardest part. The build was easy, right? It was getting that sort of consensus. And so when I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about for this webinar, I feel like there's a lot to unpack in what it takes to get these non-believers on board. And it's something that none of us ever get any training on. You just learn through sometimes hard experience how to do it. But it's not something that most people took a class on in college. I don't think anyone did, and sort of all of the social science around what we do gets really passed over for all the technical stuff.
The implementation, when you said this was difficult to measure, I just wanted to be clear. Are you talking about the implementation of putting a data product into use within an org, or the changes one would make as a result of insights derived from a data product, or the building of the data product? I don't think you mean the building, because you just said that's the easy part. Can you clarify what you meant by the implementation phases where these executives struggle?
It's both. I mean, it's the first two things that you named. So it's getting people to use it, right? And, it's not just training people on how to use the tool, but it's redefining the processes in which the tool is used. But then it's also everything downstream of that. And so in some cases, there isn't much beyond that use case, but in others, it has sort of ripple effects throughout a lot of what we do. And again, earlier in my career, I really thought that just by virtue of the fact that I was smart and experienced and meant well and wanted the best for everyone, that anything that I was advocating would just sort of organically be accepted. And then I've learned that that's not how people work typically. And it takes a little more intention than that. And it also takes really thinking through and understanding where different people are coming from. and that my perspective alone is not enough to make it happen.
Yeah, I was just listening to a podcast about this is something I'm trying to teach too in my seminar, is that one thing the design field is good for is that you get in the process of separating yourself from the work and you're putting 0 to 1 things that you came up with out into the wild and then saying, okay, I'm ready for tear down and rejection to come. And that is not a skill that I think is taught a lot of places, where it's like, here's a tough problem, solve for X. The more of an analytical type problem. It's very different than, I don't know if this is going to work. I don't even know if this is on the right track. I'm going to have to like throw swings at this and then let people tear it apart, or possibly be completely disinterested, or tell me they don't even want to look at it, period, because they just don't care. They're so actively disinterested from it. That is not a skill that is practiced. And I think it's a skill that's needed to get used to this idea that like, I'm separate from the work. And this is a kind of a game. We're playing a game here. And it's like, for me, it's a fun game. I like the game. I know some people probably don't like, why don't they use it? And they get really frustrated. It's like, how could you not find this useful? You know, it's so obvious. Of course you'd want to use this data. Like, why would you not? Are you just guessing? And we can come up with all this conjecture, but it's not their lived experience. So can you tell me any stories about like an active dissenter or an active, you change names for, what do you call it, for privacy, or we've changed their names for privacy, as they say on TV or whatever it is. But like, I'm curious to hear one of these and maybe what happened during that process. Did you ever get them involved? And was there a happy ending to it? Or was it like, no, you can't change that, and one of the learnings is to let go? Like, tell me about one of these detractors.
Okay, well, let me think. I've got many examples. One that comes to mind, and this one, just to be clear, I was more of an advisor on this one than the lead. But there was a new tool that was being built. A group of sort of super users came together to manage the process of building this new tool. And the reason for it was that it was a tool that was used for financial reporting. The CFO wanted to start closing the books on a monthly basis rather than quarterly. And everybody in operations said, there's no way we can do that with our current process. It's too cumbersome. It's too time consuming. So logically, the decision was made, well, let's build a new tool that makes it faster and easier. And then people can start using it to be able to report on a monthly basis. Two big mistakes, though, that I saw in that process. The first was, if you only bring together the super users and you don't try to get feedback from, let's say, the average user, it often means that you are missing the perspective of the person who isn't passionate about the product, right? Or even about the process, about the results, maybe doesn't care about having it be perfect, just needs to get it done. That's one characteristic of a non-believer to me, is someone who is just over capacity. And so they may be very hardworking, they may be very smart, but they just don't have bandwidth for new things. And that's something that really has to be overcome when you're putting a new product into place. So mistake number one was only getting the super users involved. Mistake number two was conflating the change in process, in this case, the timing going from quarterly to monthly, with the implementation of the new product. Because looking back somewhat predictably, what happened was the product got rolled out and everybody said, this is horrible. I now have to report every month when I used to only have to report once a quarter. Let's go back to the old tool because I liked reporting once a quarter. Again, both decisions were well meant and somewhat natural, but that product failed badly after quite a bit of investment for those two reasons. And so that would be one example.
I bet the engineering and data science got a lot of money, though. Because they always say there's never money to build it right the first time, but there's always money to build it twice, the second time to do it right.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think it was a hard lesson for everyone. And again, pretty obvious looking back that those two mistakes were big ones. But at the time, it made sense.
Yeah. This is one of the tricks, too, with like product market fit in the commercial software space. You might want to go double down and find those power users and say, this product is for people like you. It's not for the average person. It's not for the whatever, the accounting team that's checked out. It's like, this is for someone who's like, I get incentivized, like I get a bonus if I like kick ass on my numbers, and this product helps me do that. You might just, that's your marketing, that's your audience. But if it's like an internal situation, it's like, we got to satisfy everyone in accounting, not just the power user. Both have their challenges, right? Because one, you got to convince someone to swipe a credit card or pay you a fee to use it. And the other one, it's like, it's free, but you might have laziness or no incentives or too busy, these kinds of challenges. So I'm curious, like, how do you get them involved if this person's too busy and you know that like they're a linchpin in the data product being successful? What's your like, how do you think about this now going forward? If you had that playbook again, if you had that assignment again, how would you do it differently if they're like, I have no time to meet with you, and it sounds great, but.
Yeah, no, it is a challenge. And it's not the wrong strategy I should say, it's not an invalid strategy to say, I want to get the super users on board. I know they're going to be excited about this. And then they can go out and sort of evangelize for this product among others. Like, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. And in certain situations and certain organizations, that may be the best strategy. In this particular case, though, what happened was, the other 80% of the users just got completely left behind. And the super users built a very, very complicated product that then, by the time it got rolled out to everybody else, just felt completely overcooked and unnecessarily complicated. So I think if you think about who the sort of average user is and what the level of complexity that they are going to be happy with is, starting to build to that and then adding features and adding capabilities after you've built that sort of MVP and gotten that average user on board with the MVP. In this case, that definitely would have been a more successful strategy. Sort of burying people who, again, are over capacity with all the bells and whistles it just did not work.
Yeah. You had said at some point, like all of these challenges come back to cultural problems, like all changes are cultural changes, and that's often the blocker. Can you unpack that a little bit? Like what were you getting at there in your LinkedIn post?
Yeah, sure. So this was a slide that I was preparing for the webinar where I was trying to dig into what factors prevent organizational change from happening. And I had bucketed them into financial factors, technological factors, and cultural factors, which, sort of looked nice and coherent on a slide. But I started thinking about it a little more. And the financial and technological factors, the more that I thought about them, the more they just felt like cultural factors as well. So if a company can't find budget to support, in this case, the data product, that's really a cultural decision. It's not a financial decision. Like, they find the money for the things that they care about. So what that is really saying is that they don't care about this product. Also, if people are overly focused on sort of short-term gains and short-term ROI, and that is a cultural characteristic, that's not really a financial issue. Same thing with risk aversion. That's a cultural issue, not financial. And then, with technological, most of the technological barriers that I've experienced have had to do with legacy systems, interoperability issues, insufficient infrastructure, insufficient IT support. Again, those are really cultural issues if you think about it. Like, those aren't really technological issues. Solving the technology challenge is pretty easy, but you have to have a company that's motivated to do that. And so then you come to what I had originally called cultural issues, which are, ineffective leadership and inadequate communication and lack of trust and fear of the unknown. And all of those, those are, again, obviously cultural, but I think the other ones are too. And so the TLDR on all of that is that if you want to implement something new, be it a data product or, really any change in an organization, I think identifying the cultural barriers, which are fundamentally human in some way or another, and figuring out how to bring those people on board, that's sort of the crux of it. The money and the technology can be found.
Yeah. I mean, I'm with you. And I mean, I don't know how you get that to happen or get that insight from these people. The way I model this in my head and that I teach is that this comes back to exposure hour. How much exposure regularly do you have to these people so that you know what it's like to be the whatever accountant in accounting or in the finance department or whoever you're building for? It's directly correlated to that. And if you're not out there doing the non-technical, non-building, non-data work of understanding what it's like to be John, then you're never going to do a great job with that, with producing something that John cares about, or let alone would even give you the time to talk about what he might care about, especially if he's already so busy right now that it's like any change is disruptive and like just it's negative by default. Like, I don't know how you get past that without regular exposure. I mean, maybe how do you deal with this? Like, are you regularly talking to these people? How do you come up with stuff that's going to be used? And especially when you have that detractor mentality or I'm too busy for this kind of mentality, where do you go? Or do you say, I'm not even going to work on this product yet because I don't have the right leadership support? They haven't incentivized that group to make any change. So like time out, we're not even going to talk about any technology yet. Like, how do you deal with that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I agree with you. It's incredibly hard. I had the luxury of, again, building internally. I was in my own functional area and had very close connections with all the other functional areas. So it was never really a problem for me to get access to the people who were going to be stakeholders in the product. I think about that a lot, actually, for people who are working as consultants or, other sort of external data product managers, because I just don't know how you could get enough insight into what anyone is doing, particularly because, first of all, I think people are actually very bad at explaining what it is that they want. And in fact, I think asking people what they want is not helpful. I really advocate for asking people what it is that they want to do. And if you can get people to tell you what they want to do, then I think you have a shot of being able to build a product that does that thing. But there's that. And then I also think a problem is working with executive sponsors only. The executive sponsors typically have a very different perspective on what the sort of business case is for the product than the users do, and different motivations for wanting it to be in place. So if all of your information is getting filtered through the executive sponsor, you're probably not getting the full picture. One of the things, an example that I'm planning to talk about in my webinar is a product that I built where I really had 3 different users at 3 different levels. So there was the C-suite person who was sort of the executive sponsor, and then there was a level below them of executives, and then a level below them of managers, who all 3 of whom were going to be using this product, but in different ways and for different reasons. And thinking through how to talk about the product with each of them was part of the challenge. But I know if I had only been interfacing with that COO, I would not have gotten the full picture.
This is a very common challenge we have in the design space all the time about multiple different use cases. The persona A needs to be able to do X, Y, and Z, A, B, C for this other persona. How do you come up with something that's not going to be kind of crap for everybody because it's trying to do so many different things there? That's a really hard place to get into, but I like that you're at least interfacing with these people. And part of it is that negotiation of like, frankly, you don't really know what's good for them. You think you do, but you really have never done that job. You've never been a manager of a whatever before, of a call center or of a sales team. You imagine what you would like to get from the sales team. So it sometimes it comes out in words about they need to use something like this as a requirement, but they really don't know what it's like to be a sales manager or what their incentives are. And they're not working it backwards from the people on the ground that are going to have to eat and drink this thing all day, or maybe all week, or whatever, however it's being used. But those are very common challenges. It's a messy problem space, and it's not a technology problem, which is where I think a lot of data and technical teams that work on data products struggle, is because it's not yet a technology implementation problem. It's still a mushy, yucky person feelings problem. It's incentives. It's not neat and bundled up, and part of it is really defining that problem space. So I don't know. I'm just like going on my soapbox here in agreement with you, I guess.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And I also think that when you think about sort of as you sort of move down the hierarchy, and this is a generalization, but my experience has been with the sort of C-suite executive level discussions, there you really do want sort of a classic business case. You know, you want to define what the opportunity is, the problem, the solution. You want to talk about costs and benefits. You want to align with corporate strategy. Like those things are fairly tidy to map out. But as you get down to the user, I think what they, at least in my experience, what they want to know is, how is this going to make my life easier? How is this going to make it faster, whatever I'm trying to do? Or how is it going to result in better outcomes? And ideally, all three. And so, yes, they may have an interest in how it aligns with corporate strategy, but that's not what's going to motivate them. It's really just easier, faster, better.
Yeah. And if you don't know what the baseline is for that, which you can't get from just third-party observation or like the horses, if you don't get it from the horse's mouth, it's really just a guessing game, because often you get the corporate strategy baloney, which is not, as you said, that is not what someone individually in their day-to-day work is thinking about that most of the time. They're not incentivized to do that, right? They're incentivized to get the monthly reporting done. I don't care what the numbers are. I just need to type them in. It's your job to care about the actual numbers and what to do about it. They're complete. Exactly. I mean, they do care. They want to have a job, but beyond I want to keep my job and maybe this touches on my bonus incentive or whatever. Do you really care that much? In my experience, most users do not.
And the flip side is that many executives are not going to be motivated by the argument that this product is going to make the user's life easier, right? Especially just being honest, if the user's on salary, do they care that it saves them an hour a week or an hour a day? Maybe not. So my point is, you have to have both. For each stakeholder, you have to have a reason for the product, and it probably isn't going to be the same depending on their role in the process.
Yeah, design language, I frame these as user experience outcomes and then business outcomes, and they sort of can overlap a little bit, but there's really two distinct things, and you can't get the business outcome if you don't make the people using it happy in some way, where happiness really means I made their life better in some way, saving the time, making them money, getting rid of pain or hassle, whatever that may be. You can't get to the golden land of the business value piece, which is really what you want. So part of it is in my experience, it's framing to a leader that what you want has this necessary speed bump you have to get over first. And if you don't get over that, you can't get what you want, except guessing. You might get lucky and come out with something that maybe worked that one time, but that's not a repeatable strategy. If you're going to be doing this with multiple products or anything like that, it's not repeatable. I know that's my take on it, but this is great. I know we're kind of in fierce agreement on a bunch of that, which maybe makes for a terrible podcast. I don't know. I usually like to find out we have some disagreement and dig into that space, but I have a very similar framing of the world in my head that I think you do. So one thing I want to share with people as we kind of wrap up here is what would they get in the session we're going to do? This, we're going to have a group discussion. You're going to kind of kick it off with some slides. It sounded like you were going to go to a case study, and I know you're not going to give it all away here, but maybe you can give us a taste of what else would be in there.
Yeah. So in the webinar, what I want to talk about with the group, and again, this is intended to be a conversation, so I hope everybody who comes will bring their opinions, but I did want to dig into these barriers to change and, sort of what that means to us as product leaders. I wanted to share a framework for thinking about change that I found to be very useful for me. And then, yes, I have a little case study, but I think one that may be sort of good to illustrate some of these concepts with actual slides from my deck from when I was out there shilling for this product. So I want to use that both as an example, but also for some lessons learned. And then I want to dig into some very specific tactics. So I have some things from my current work. I have some tactics from my old work that I want to share that are just ideas about how to get people who are, again, who I'm calling non-believers on board with this. And then at the end, I have sort of 4 key concepts that I want to talk about with the group, and that'll be the discussion.
Cool. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I imagine we'll have some good questions and some curiosity here, especially if you're able to deal with these detractors in some way that everyone else hasn't figured out how to do yet. So I'm looking forward to seeing everyone, and thanks for your contributions and the DPLC as well. That date is it's December 18th, 2024. It's a Wednesday. It's going to be the new time for us, 3 p.m. Eastern time. So I'm glad you're trying out a new slot. We've had most of ours at noon Eastern, so we'll be giving that a go. And yeah, Anna, any kind of closing thoughts from you? Anything you would like people to take away, if there's kind of one thing that maybe you've learned or something that a key idea that you'd like the audience to hear you talk about for briefly?
I guess it's the idea that I think pretty much everyone is going to have some non-believers in their life as a data product leader. And it can be tempting to just ignore them and sort of, barrel forward and do the best you can. But I think through many years of experience, that there are ways to get those people on board, and that if you can convert those non-believers to believers, they can really help. So it's worth spending some time to think about it. And again, that art of persuasion is not taught to us formally, but I think it is a big, important part of our job.
Yeah. You made me think of something with the persuasion thing, and you said that might be a viable strategy for some earlier, but your comment about, building it for a power user and then they tell all their friends, this is literally like marketing strategy as taught by people like Seth Godin, which is marketing isn't really like, oh, it's advertising, go spend money, try these tactics. It's really, how do you get someone to talk about the thing and how it made their life better or changed their status or made them money or whatever the thing is. That word of mouth is precisely what you want to do, is create something that's so good it naturally spreads. The question, though, is whether or not is it spreading to people who care about the people who are evangelizing it? Because as you said, the average user may not care about that power user and what it's done for them because they don't aspire to be like them. But that can be in fact, I think that's almost a necessity, is that you want to have some virality in the solutions that you're building if you're worried at all about adoption. But it does mean you need to know the audience that you're serving to see, are all the people over here in this accounting group, for example, or sales team, are they all having similar aspirations such that if we nailed it for this person, the others would likely follow because they're all incentivized the same way. So I think that's great that you brought that up, and I just had a little connection to, I love Seth Godin. He's one of the people I listen to quite a bit, and it sounded right out of his playbook, that model.
I just saw something recently that was saying that basically every job in the end ends up being sales. And, so this is in some ways about what that sales job in data product leadership looks like.
Sure. Full agreement. Anna, it's so good. So great to chat with you. Where can people get in touch with you? Is LinkedIn, are you posting on there a lot, or where can they find you?
I am avid LinkedIn user, and I love to connect with people there. So please reach out.
Cool. Awesome. I will put your link to LinkedIn on in the show notes here. And thank you again for coming on Experiencing Data. It's great to catch up.
You too. Thanks, Brian.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Experiencing Data with Brian O'Neill. If you did enjoy it, please consider sharing it with the hashtag #ExperiencingData. To get future podcast updates or to subscribe to Brian's mailing list, where he shares his insights on designing valuable enterprise data products and applications, visit designingforanalytics.com/podcast.